We've got Steve Johnson, Daniel, Greg. We are here to answer your questions. As the name denotes, you can ask us anything. We take a lot of questions before the event so that we can prepare a little bit. We will also take some questions live. So folks in Facebook, folks that are in the webinar are free to ask questions. And I am going to start with a very interesting one from Nikhil, who is here with us in the webinar. He is a member at career.pm. And the question is, how do you know when to stop product discovery and move to the next phase?
Well, you certainly want to avoid analysis. What is it? Analysis paralysis?
For sure. I think it may make sense just for everybody's benefit to back up and let's kind of level set on what product discovery is. So if we think about developing products, conceiving of products, taking them to market, very often it's thought of in two kind of very broad work streams. There's discovery, which is figuring out what we want to do. And then there's delivery, which is actually building it and making it available to the market. So we're talking about that first phase, product discovery, and Nikhil is saying, I mean, you could analyze something, as Steve's implying, forever. How do you know when to move? So I have some strong thoughts on that. I'm a big proponent of like structured product discovery, but I'm curious what you guys think.
Well, let me start by saying, I feel that discovery actually never ends. It feels to me like a lot of times we feel like we do some interviews. All right, we have done the interviews. We are done. And now let's go forward with this factory mindset. And what I do love about agile methods is just the whole idea of embracing learning at every step along the way. And there are kind of three steps in my head, and that is first discovering problems that we want to solve, which means we're going to kick off a product idea. There's a second kind of discovery that happens more at the feature level. We're thinking time to build a new release or time to add some new features to an existing capability. And we need to discover what problems we're trying to solve with that, or else we'll end up with a Swiss Army knife that does a whole bunch of things, but nothing well. And then there's a third phase, which you talked about, which is delivery. But you know what? There's discovery there too. And it's like identifying the friction of buying. So one way I think to kind of jump on your thought is it's all about identifying friction. Friction for our buyers, which means, I'm trying to buy your product, but it's just so darn hard. Or, I talked to a sales guy and he doesn't know my answers, but he didn't bring a sales engineer, and you guys don't have any, technical FAQs on your website, frictions in buying. And then, the other part of discovery is frictions in using. I'm trying to use your product to do things. For instance, I'm using a new product that I have to export files, and it's really tedious. And I was just delighted the other day when I saw in the new release that there was a bulk export. So I could set up 10 or 15 things and export them all while I went and watched TV. Whereas previously I was having to, export one, wait 5 minutes, come back and export the next, wait 5 minutes. And it was really tedious.
Yeah.
So there's discovery continuously.
I think that's a good
ultimately,
point. Yeah, there are types of discovery. And I am used to the term being used to a fairly formal process where we're looking at something new and discovery ends. And I think this starts speaking to the question when we make a decision to go into development, right? So I agree that some type of discovery activity is going on all the time, and you'll read about continuous discovery these days. I think that picks up the thought that you're talking about, Steve, even during delivery, during development. But I've spent a lot of time looking at, when I need to make a big bet, I have a big product. This isn't a trivial thing. In B2B, a lot of times the MVP could be years of development, certainly months of development. So I would say you have to understand in your organization what product discovery means to everybody. And you have to enter it with a clear set of goals. Like, how do you know when you're done? By the practice that we've defined at career.pm, you're done when you have a formal decision to start developing that product. Or to not, when you have a decision, I should say, when you have a decision about whether you go forward or not. So I think, regardless of your interpretation of the term, you should not enter product discovery just kind of open-ended.
Good point. I
I
completely
guess
agree.
I guess one way to put it would be to separate the responsibility from the activities. And so you are responsible for the discovery, as in, broadly speaking, and there are all sorts of discovery activities that you will go through all the time. So as a role, you are constantly doing discovery, and in practical terms, those activities might shift over time for different initiatives and so on. But
yeah,
I think that could be a helpful way to make the distinction.
Cool. Perfect. I
And,
hope that helped,
discovery
Nikhil.
is to beat this dead horse here. Discovery is also is primarily just about mitigating risk. I mean, there have been so many products over the years that solve problems that people ought to have, but don't. So there's a huge risk there of building a device or building a service or building a whatever that doesn't actually resonate with the market. And pretty much every part of your business plan is a hypothesis. And some of those things have low risk. If I'm wrong, I'm close enough, right? But
Mm-hmm.
some of them have, to your point, some really big risks. So we ought to set up some interviews or some observation or some surveys or some A/B testing or some method for reducing the risk or mitigating the risk.
Yeah.
And you'll done when you have an answer.
Yeah. And we're working on a tool now that looks at that through these lenses, these design thinking lenses of viability, feasibility, and desirability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You should convince yourself along those dimensions that you're at critical mass to move forward. I would like to move to the next question so that we get to several of these. And this one,
You know me better than that. It takes me 10 minutes to say hello.
I think we all, that could probably be said for all of us on the call. The next question, this one is really tough. It came from Fernando, who's another career.pm member. And I summarized it, but it's basically, how should you react as a PM in a first mover kind of organization when leadership starts hearing footprints or footsteps, start seeing competitors, and leadership is instructing you just to try to keep up with the competitors to get into this feature war that they want you to just, and it's a very natural kind of response, especially with products that have a sales force. They will go out and their customers will say, hey, I would buy your thing if it only had this thing. And there builds, this internal pressure to just keep up with competition. But as a PM, how can you deal with leadership? We should probably discuss why it's a bad thing to get into this feature war, or if it's a bad thing. My opinion is it's a bad thing. But I think it's a great question. And we'll just open it up to you guys. Let's start. It's a big question. Let's kind of start framing the question and see if we can chip away at it.
Well, Daniel, why don't you go first? What do you have in terms of just the pros and cons of being a feature factory?
Right. So I guess it's very easy to lose track of what you're actually trying to solve for, right? So what is the problem and the value that your product creates? And in that sense, if you're just chasing features, it's like you're designing for something that isn't perhaps looks good, but doesn't necessarily solve the problem well. And so, and it will inevitably lead you to this, comparison tables and that sort of positioning, and that you don't want to end up there.
It's commoditization, right, Daniel?
Right.
These bake-offs where they just look across, oh, you're missing this feature. Poof.
Yeah.
So you need to figure out a way to. Is the right word too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel, we discussed this earlier, and I thought you made a really good point that, we're in the product business.
Right.
So sometimes we lose sight of the fact that this is a business and we need to do what is going to support the business. We're not just there to have the best product in the market or the most fully featured product in the market for the sake of having a fully featured product, right?
That is one of my pet peeves. Like I see people in love with the products that they work on, and so the product is an artifact, and we should be proud of the things that we work on, but it's an artifact in service of a business. So if the product is in a business or in a market that is somehow being commoditized, then you need to figure out a way to either differentiate or even step out of that market progressively to something different that isn't commoditized. So I guess that's I prefer to view it as a simple as a business tool, and of course we want to make it as great as possible, but it is a business tool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting question. How do you deal with management? And this is a tough discussion. I think the best you can do as a PM is to paint this downside that, guys, where we are headed is into a commoditized business where we are trying to keep up with 5 other very smart and capable companies. A lot of times, for the last several years, this has been couched in terms of this blue ocean, red ocean. So blue ocean is full of new opportunities. Red oceans are full of blood. And going in and slugging it out, competing with 5 other companies is just the hardest way in the world to make a living. So I think what you want to do is look for these blue oceans. And in line with a lot of the thinking today, it's not about features and functions. Some of the really smart companies out there are going and changing their business model. The canonical example, this is years ago, is Salesforce. They came to market with an average CRM, customer relationship management, but they sold it with a subscription. So instead of going and begging IT to install a bunch of servers and maintain the software, head of the sales just whipped out his credit card, and then, right then, he had CRM. Wasn't the greatest CRM in the market, but he had it. He didn't have to go through a lot. That was a change to the pricing model, and I think an important part of the overall business model. And I think that's what I would take away from it. With your management, you have to paint a picture that we can go and try to slog this out and compete with everybody else, or we can look for a blue ocean. And the first place we should probably look, the first kind of innovation cycles we should invest are in our business model, not in our products, features, and functions.
Yeah, I went to a conference a while back. It was a wonderful conference, but they said, love your product. And of course, we all love our products, just like we sort of love our kids, stuff like that. But I argue, love the problem. I mean, when in doubt, go back to this is what the buyers are telling me, or this is what the users are telling me, and they don't care about this feature. They care about solving their problems. And I think the Me Too mindset really permeated Microsoft during the Ballmer era. He was always looking at, how do I catch up to somebody? And in fact, everybody, right? Pick a business. I'm going to try and catch up. I'm going to try and catch up. And I think their new leadership is really quite focused on solving problems for their customers and, ignore the rest of the market. I'm sure
Yeah,
they
and you
still do
see the
competitive
results in their
stuff.
stock
I grant
price,
it.
right?
But yeah, look at what's happened over the last
Yeah.
short time.
I was at Microsoft during Ballmer's reign there. And I think his philosophy was wait for a market to develop and go in and monetize it as like the big guy. And what happened is they were just too late. They missed mobile. They missed really the first wave of the internet and all that. So, to summarize, I would say that, you should go to your management and you should paint the downside. What happens if we just get into this kind of feature war, if we just help commoditize the market? Let's find a blue ocean. Let's start with our business model. A big part of our business model is really identifying the problems, the market problems we're going to solve. That is the first part of my business model that I would go back and revisit. I would look at the problems and the segments I want to serve, and I would ask myself, are there underserved problems that we didn't realize? And can we get more specific around our segments and maybe really, pick out the most valuable segments for us and let the other ones fight it out for this kind of general market.
Totally. And
Yeah, I hope
also
that helps.
leverage your skills, not their skills. I mean, instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, the competitor has this thing," you're like, "Well, wait, what makes our product unique based on the people we have and the methods we have and the data we have and the tools that we have? Let's be different
Yeah.
by being ourselves instead of trying to be, a lookalike to our competitor."
Yeah. We have just launched a tool. We renamed it today. I think we're going to call it the Product Decision Canvas. But
Nice.
if you're interested in that, ping us on the site. We have a new version of a canvas that's really optimized for product managers, and that can help with this kind of business model innovation that I'm talking about, capturing your business model in an approachable way, and then innovating over that. So I would
Cool.
like to move on to our next question, which comes from Maggie. Maggie is one of the people I coach, very smart person. And she asked such an interesting question that is so fraught. I love these kinds of tough questions. You know, we do not handle softballs in Ask Us Anything.
Oh, darn.
And
I'm
she
on the
asks
wrong
us, yeah,
program.
I should have told you that, Steve, before we invited you. But she asked, what is the best way to get feedback or input from your competitors' customers?
Mm.
So she would like to find out why people love her competitors so much, you know, just as an input, figuring out her roadmap and what she should be doing.
Mhm.
I guess a lot of us would like to do it. It's a complicated question, ethically, practically. But what do we think? How would you go about getting input from your competitors' customers?
My favorite tool and the secret weapon, particularly in product marketing, is win-loss analysis.
Yeah.
Throughout my career, I've had so many experiences where the sales guy said, well, we lost the deal because your product sucks and the price is too high. And I say, great, and then I call the client and they say, oh yeah, it had nothing to do with that. I was just trying to get rid of the sales guy. The other client, the other, product had this critical thing for me. I've had literally no problems getting in to talk to, on a video call or a physical face-to-face call to talk to competitors, customers, as soon as they know I'm a product manager, not a sales guy trying to
Mm-hmm.
reboot the deal.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess it differs, you know, if you're in a consumer oriented product, I think you have more degrees of freedom to
Hmm.
identify people and incent them with an Amazon card or whatever to give you feedback. In B2B, it's tough. But if you can find these customers, so kind of,
It's
I
not
think,
tough. No, it's not tough. You know what's tough is the internal freaking politics.
yeah,
It's like sales doesn't want you to do it because they think it's going to be a witch hunt, and we're going to find out that they blew the deal because they
yeah,
don't know anything about the product, and all they know how to do is drive, to the airport. Um, or we find out that they communicated something that was technically wrong. They're terrified that product management is going to rat them out somehow, and that's not the point. In
yeah,
fact, in my win-loss analysis, I've almost never encountered, well, a few times I've encountered I hated my sales guy, but mostly it's, oh, I didn't know you did that. Oh, I didn't know you had that feature. And so there's a flaw in the way we've enabled sales teams.
yeah.
But it's super easy in B2B. It's super easy to do win-loss.
So
But
win loss,
all of the
yes.
frustration is inside the building.
Yeah, I would say, Steve, like I would generalize that to say it can be very difficult in a B2B context to actually speak to customers that got pitched by another company. They may not be interested. You can also get into like really weird kind of ethical grounds. So, what I advise people to do is look for good proxies.
Hmm.
So if you can't talk directly to a customer who rejected your product or somebody who's in the market, you're right. Sales doesn't want you talking to leads with good reason. If they haven't
Hmm.
closed the deal, you might just, you know, confuse things. If
Right.
you reach out to a competitor's customers, they can wonder, how did you find out about this? What are you doing? It can really create like uncomfortable situations with your competitors. But there are people inside the building and close to you. Your partners can be a great source. Your
Hmm.
partners might not just be selling your stuff, but other stuff. So I would suggest that you really
That's also
look for
good.
proxies and get that information secondhand. In a way, like there's nothing can replace some direct communication, but your strategy should probably always involve some, you know, amount of talking to proxies, because they smart
Hmm.
proxies will consolidate things and save you a lot of time and money,
Hmm.
you know?
Let me say one other note. I have a friend, Charles, at a place called the Win-Loss Agency. And Charles says they're finding, as they do third-party work, that customers are much more willing to talk to an independent third party, even knowing
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be reported back.
Mm-hmm.
That,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so terrified that the conversation is going to lead to, why did you not choose my product? Let me try to resell. Let me try to reboot the deal. Let me try to change your mind. But they know, or an analyst firm is not going to do that. So
Yeah.
he's had a lot of luck with really large companies doing B2B win-loss analysis through a third party, which, by the way, also eliminates almost all the politics.
Yeah, very good point. I hope that was helpful, Maggie. It's probably an elaboration. She and I talked about this not too long ago. It was nice to hear kind of the validation from Steve that, yeah, a lot of the information exists in people outside the actual customers themselves who have dealt with a lot of customers. So especially in B2B, and Maggie is in B2B, look for proxies. The next question. This one is, yeah, I think really speaks to the more kind of personal nature of product management. It's not so much a theory or practice question. And the question is, do brilliant PMs also face imposter syndrome? How do you get over imposter syndrome? And if I may, I want to turn it over to you guys. But for those who haven't heard of it, imposter syndrome is just this feeling that you don't deserve kind of your position and maybe the respect that comes with it. So you're a product manager, people think you're super effective, your management loves you, but in quiet moments you say, I don't know what I'm doing. Any moment somebody's going to figure out that I am completely lost and I'm going to be screwed. And it can really create massive anxiety for people. It's not just a trivial thing. It can be, it can really impact your career and your life. So what do you guys think? Do even, apparently brilliant PMs, have you encountered PMs that have imposter syndrome?
Daniel, what do you think?
Well,
Or are you
I
experiencing right now that very
I
thing?
do. I live by that constantly, and I know, and I'm far from considering myself any sort of brilliant person. So I'm not sure how top tier, super experienced PMs would feel like, but I do feel like that most of the time. And I guess what I resort back to is when I'm able to show, or either to myself or to the rest of the organization, that I'm being effective in the decisions that I'm taking. And so if I'm moving the needle forward in some way, that kind of settles my internal little devil. But other than that, I don't have any anything else. I guess I live by that feeling, but I also use that to make myself better, and try to prove myself that I'm not that clueless.
Good. I came up to product management by way of sales and marketing. I was a programmer for a couple of years, then I became a sales engineer, then I became a sales rep, then I became a product manager. And yeah, I had some serious imposter syndrome because suddenly I'm in a fairly technical PM role with a sales and marketing kind of a background. And I sat down with my team and I said, I want to do well here. How can I be a valued contributor? I'm not going to, start programming. You guys do that. What can I do to be valued here? And they went, hey, tell us what's going on with the business and tell us what's going on in the market. Be the expert that we need to tell us about personas and their problems. And I'm like, oh, I know how to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great, Steve. Maybe your perception of the value you should be adding is much broader and deeper than what's really expected. So by talking to the stakeholders, you can find out that they don't expect you to be Superman. They don't expect you to be Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. They want to know what's going on the outside world, outside the
Right.
lab. They want you
Right.
to drop by every once in a while and share, what's happening with the product. So I think that is a good point as a product manager. Understand what your stakeholders really want, and then assess whether or not you can, deliver that and give yourself room to grow.
I think there's an additional problem in that the role of product manager is so ill-defined. I've got a stat that's kind of right. I'd have to look it up, but I believe it is only 20% of organizations have a clear definition of the role of product management. So how uncomfortable is it to say, I'm the product manager whatever that is. And you're being pulled in myriad ways. If you could get clarity on roles and responsibilities, I think that would reduce the
Mm-hmm.
fear, right? It would increase
Yeah.
the confidence. And there is a big difference between confidence and bravado. I think a lot of times in the beginning, you're like, you know what, I'm just going to bluster my way through here and pretend to be confident. But after a while, if you start contributing in meaningful ways that the stakeholders value, you're like, hey, I deserve this confidence. I'm actually very good at this.
Yeah. So I do a ton of coaching with product managers at every level and product leaders. And I can tell you that that is the biggest surprise. This year I really started doing a ton of coaching is how often people talk about their feelings of imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
So the simple answer to your question, Nikhil, is yes. If you look at great leaders, great actors, great athletes, you will always find cases of people who had like this crippling insecurity when they weren't on the field or at the bargaining table or whatever. So it goes far beyond product management. I tell the people I coach that I've never had imposter syndrome at all, I don't think. And it's because as a kid I realized everybody is kind of full of crap, and that's okay. Everybody, if you dig down, probably isn't as knowledgeable or as comfortable as they seem. And I realized that's okay. Putting your best foot forward, maybe blustering a little bit, isn't a big deal. In my career, I became a consultant, and I realized that a lot of what customers were paying for was just peace of mind. So if I could project and not fold under, when there was a question asked that I didn't know, just projecting a little bit of confidence, reasonably, was already really creating value. So remember, all the people around you, they all have these doubts. The thing that kills us is this feeling of isolation. Everybody feels that way. Talk to your stakeholders, come up with a set of, really understand what they want and measure yourself against that instead of this amorphous thing in your head that you should be some kind of superstar or something. Few of us are, and we're happy, we're productive. So I hope that helps there.
Good one.
Um,
That's a great answer. We have a couple of questions coming in from the Facebook group. I don't know if we have time for
yeah,
both of
let's
them,
do it.
but
I still have another
okay,
10 or 15 minutes. Let's do
right.
it.
So like I guess the first one is we kind of tackled that on our previous call, in our previous Ask Us Anything session. So we might share that link with the group so they can go back and look into it, which is about how do you start your career in PM. Um, and but I think the second one is it's a good question as well. It's what are the basic fundamentals when creating a competitive analysis? So what are you, if you're doing competitive analysis, I guess, what do you want to have in place for that activity?
Cool. Steve?
Okay. I think the most important thing is to articulate for yourself how the competitor positions themselves and how you might reposition them with your customers. So, if I were, for instance, competing with Zoom, I love Zoom. And so let's suppose I'm coming up with, Zoom version 2. I'd say, Zoom is really good for webinars and for technical people, but I'm going to build Zoom for teachers. So I'm going to build a whole thing focused on a market and convey that, hey, Zoom is a wonderful generic tool, but if you're a teacher, there's some special needs that you have that are not met by the market. So nonetheless, the point being, how do they position themselves? And as you reflect on that, can you reposition them in a way that is favorable to you? That Zoom is great. I mean, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
Zoom's great, but it's not really for teachers. It doesn't have the ability to monitor, who's not participating in class, for instance, on a Zoom call, whatever. And ideally, what you want to do, and this is an old recent Trout concept, find their strength and then make it a weakness. What is the
Mhm.
one thing they have that they will never change? So in terms of profiling your competitors, certainly you need to know, who they are and what their product fundamentally is, but what kind of market do they serve? You know, what are their strengths? And if you can reposition them as being in a different market than yours, or if you can find the weakness in their strength, then you can start empowering your sales team with battle cards that say, you know, hey, that's fine. You know, this product, the competitor's product is fine for these other people, but we're focused on teachers, or we're focused on tech, or we're focused on medical, and we have a focus that the leader doesn't have.
Yeah. And that takes some investigation, some analysis to figure out how they position themselves. You may not be aware. So I love that thought. I have done kind of competitive positioning engagements before. And what I took out of that is not all competitors are equal. So like everything else as a PM, prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. Figure out in what segment or with what product you're feeling the most pain and start there. It's better to have deep information about the competitors that are really disruptive than this overall market view. It's nice to have the overall market view, not as nice as having, as Steve said, a battle card for this competitor that helps salespeople sell against them. And I've done the same thing. I like Steve's thought about positioning. Another way to think about that is figure out how the competitor positions you, right? So what are they telling customers that, you know, about you, about your weaknesses? You really need to understand that as a product manager, because you have to come up with, you know, either features or some kind of positioning around that. So this idea of how we position each other, I agree with Steve, is really critical. And beyond that, there's so many resources available on the internet, you know, templates you can fill out and all that stuff. So what I would tell you is find one that resonates with you. Talk to your stakeholders. Some of the consumers of competitive analysis are sales, obviously. Marketing, talk to them, find out what they need. It's great when marketing can take this up and do the lion's share of it. I haven't seen it in my career. I've always had to do it. And I found that the key was just prioritizing, figuring out of the 10 people competing against us, what are the 2 that I need to focus on and understand? Because probably in understanding them, you will also get insight. You know, some of the insights you have to them will apply to some of your other competitors.
I also think another angle is just try to figure out how customers and prospects are positioning you. So how are you perceived by them? So if you ask them about different competitors, what kind of mind share are they putting you in, and say, well, those guys are expensive, or those guys are really, you know, high end, or whatever it is that they perceive. Those qualities are also useful to you know, realize what's actually the perceived positioning from the people that you intend to position towards.
Yeah, so this became like a discussion about positioning. I think that says something about the question that's really key. You know, positioning is how people consider your product relative to alternatives. It's about that simple. So understand, you know, how your competitors are positioning themselves. Look for what they consider a strength and figure out how you can turn it into a weakness. In terms of tooling, I think SWOT analysis on your competitors can be super effective. Don't do it yourself. Get other people in the room that have input. And then actually, like these business model canvases, understanding their business model and how it differs from you. Things like, what segments are they going after? What problems do they solve the best? What is their UVP? By the way, most companies don't really have a UVP. But anyway, what are they claiming is their UVP? So there's some tools available. There are some templates. Prioritize. Think deeply about how things get positioned. And I would say with that, we still have some questions in the backlog for next week.
Yeah.
Steve, it was a pleasure having you. I hope you will come back. I hope you enjoyed this. We would love to have you do another session with us.
Love to do it.
At some point. Wonderful. And guys, keep the questions coming in. We do have a backlog of them, and over time, we will try to get to all of them. Thanks, everybody.
Super.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, Steve. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.